Midnight settles over Fifth Avenue as the last Gilded Age mansion exhales like a wounded cathedral. Moonlight slides across torn silk drapes, revealing the dust of a dynasty no one remembers. Here, in these hollow rooms, fortunes once tried to outlive time and learned how swiftly a nation forgets its kings. So a question hangs in the dark. What survives when America decides luxury has lived long enough? You're watching Old Money Talk, where wealth remembers. You walk into New York as it once was, not the city of screens and sirens, but a restless colossus of coal smoke and rising ambition. The year is somewhere in the early 1870s, and America is standing on the edge of its own becoming. The Civil War is finished, the nation is bruised, and yet the streets feel charged with a feverish electricity. You hear it in the clatter of carriage wheels, the hiss of steam engines, the impatient rhythm of a young empire deciding it wants to age faster than it can grow. You pass the harbor first. Always the harbor. Ships lean under the weight of steel rails, machine parts, crates marked with the names Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, names that do not yet echo, but stir like sleeping giants. Immigrants spill onto the docks carrying hope wrapped in cloth, unaware that their sweat will build palaces too grand for their own footsteps. Somewhere in the distance, a factory whistle cuts the morning air like a blade, reshaping the hours ahead. You walk inland. The city grows louder, heavier. Every surface seems coated in a thin sheen of industry, iron dust drifting through the air like metallic snow, settling on the hems of silk skirts and the polished boots of bankers. Even the gas lamps hum with a faint industrial glow, as if the city's very light is made of ambition. And above it all, scaffolds climb toward the sky. New money is rising, aggressively, unapologetically, with a confidence that feels both admirable and dangerous. You sense the hunger in the brickwork, the pride in every new construction, the belief that greatness is simply a matter of stacking enough steel atop enough borrowed time. You walk into the financial district, where the country's future is being drawn in ink. Inside narrow offices lit by green-shaded lamps, young clerks move like frantic shadows. They copy figures for railroads stretching west, for oil fields booming in Pennsylvania, for steel mills erupting across Pittsburgh. You can almost feel the shift. Power is moving away from old plantations, old titles, old traditions. A new aristocracy is being minted in ledgers and smoke. But behind every triumph lies a deeper question. What does it cost to build a fortune at this speed? You drift toward Millionaires Row, Fifth Avenue, still young in its grandeur. The mansions here are more like declarations than homes. Marble facades imported from Europe, banisters carved from Brazilian rosewood, chandeliers purchased in Paris, hung proudly above rooms that still smell faintly of plaster and ambition. New York's elite, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Goulds, are beginning their quiet war for social dominance. You can feel the tension in the pavement. The old families, with their European manners and inherited grace, look down on the industrial tycoons who built their wealth with soot-stained hands and ruthless efficiency. But the tycoons look right back, unbothered, ready to build higher, spend louder, and force their way into drawing rooms designed to keep them out. You hear whispers from a ballroom under construction. Mrs. Caroline Astor's Tuesday nights, the most coveted invitations in the country. She will decide who belongs to New York society. She will draw the line between old and new wealth. And yet, as workers paint gold leaf on ceiling medallions, you sense the irony. Even the old guard feels the ground shifting beneath their silken slippers. You drift toward Central Park. Frederick Law Olmsted's masterpiece is still fresh, its paths carved with meticulous intention. But as you walk through the trees, the city's roar never truly fades. You feel the duality. Nature made to look effortless, and a city built through effort so intense it nearly hides the struggle. A carriage passes. Inside, a young financier, J.P. Morgan, broad-shouldered and unsmiling, stares toward the skyline with a gaze that feels like a verdict waiting for ink. He is not yet the most powerful banker in America, but something in him already understands that the nation will one day bend to his will. You pass a newspaper stand. Headlines shout of progress. New factories, expanding rail empires, rising fortunes. But mixed between the lines is a faint unease. Strikes in the west, labor riots simmering, whispers of monopolies tightening their grip. The price of greatness is beginning to show, and the city, for all its brilliance, trembles under its own velocity. Night settles slowly. Gas lamps flicker alive, washing the streets in a warm yellow glow. You watch the city transform again, from ambition to opulence. Couples in evening wear step out of bronze-trimmed carriages. Opera houses fill. Hotels like the Fifth Avenue Hotel buzz with the sound of champagne and rising confidence. Yet you notice something else too. A fog slides in from the harbor, soft, deliberate, eerily quiet. It curls between the cobblestones, wraps around the iron fences, slips under the doors of mansions where fortunes are being toasted. It feels like an omen, a reminder that nothing rises without casting a long shadow behind it. Inside one newly finished mansion, a dinner party is underway. Vanderbilt money, fresh, bright, unapologetic, is being celebrated. Crystal glasses clink. Laughter fills hallways that didn't exist a year ago. But you notice the slight shiver when someone mentions the economy. The uneasy glance when a guest wonders how long America can climb without stumbling. You walk out again, into the fog thickening on Fifth Avenue. The gas lamps glow like distant stars swallowed by smoke. The city's heartbeat slows, but never sleeps. Even now, long after the carriages have quieted, construction continues somewhere in the darkness. A hammer striking wood, a new dream being nailed into place. And as you stand there, watching the fog swallow the street, you feel the shift that history remembers but the living often miss. This is not just growth. It is acceleration, expansion, hunger stretched past safety, a nation believing it can build forever without once looking down. In that moment, you understand the truth the city refuses to speak out loud. The Gilded Age is not simply rising. It is overreaching, and somewhere, in the quiet between hammer strikes, you hear the first, faint crack. In wealth's first glow, its ending already whispered. You walk down Fifth Avenue as it entered its most theatrical decade, the 1880s, when New York no longer built homes but monuments. The city had decided it would not look across the Atlantic for architectural envy anymore. Instead, it would summon Europe's grandeur onto American soil and crown it in marble. You feel it immediately. This is not a street, but a rivalry carved into stone. The Vanderbilt houses rise first, colossal, unapologetic, shimmering with imported limestone and ambition. You see workmen hoisting blocks the size of tombstones, fitting them into facades more ornate than any the city has seen. Cornelius Vanderbilt too wants his name chiseled into eternity the way his grandfather carved railroads across the nation. You sense the urgency in every column, every portico. The family is building not merely for comfort, but for legitimacy. You step inside one of these palaces, the 640 Fifth Avenue mansion, still smelling of fresh plaster and wet paint. The vestibule blooms into a hall of marble so bright it almost hurts to look at. Every footstep you take echoes like a declaration. Upstairs, a grand staircase coils upward with a kind of arrogance, its balustrades curling like frozen waves. In one room, a worker dusts gold leaf, real gold, pressed by hand, onto a ceiling medallion imported from Paris. The chandelier waiting to hang beneath it is enormous. A glittering constellation of crystal drops cut so perfectly they scatter light into 1,000 trembling flames. You feel the room breathe with expectation, as if the walls themselves are waiting to be admired. But outside, across the street, someone else watches with disdain. Old money, the Astors, the Livingstons, the Schermerhorns, are horrified by this vulgar display of wealth. To them, true refinement whispers. It does not roar. Their mansions, stately but understated, suddenly look like shy relics next to the Vanderbilt fortresses rising with operatic confidence. And yet, you sense the hypocrisy beneath their scorn. Their own fortunes once began with fur trading, land speculation, and savvy marriages. Hardly the noble beginnings they now pretend to embody. But time has granted them the illusion of sanctity, and they cling to it like a family heirloom. You walk through Washington Square, where old money still gathers for quiet dinners by candlelight. Their parlors are dim, carpeted in Persian rugs faded by decades of cautious respectability. These rooms do not shout. They murmur. They carry ancestry like perfume. And every evening, they discuss the same quiet threat. What do we do about the Vanderbilts? You hear the question whispered behind embroidered fans, tucked between the clinks of porcelain teacups. Because new money isn't just building mansions, it's building credibility. And credibility is something old money cannot allow to be purchased. You drift now toward Newport, Rhode Island, the summer colony where America pretends it is France. Here, the competition grows even more theatrical. Behind gates adorned with wrought iron swirls, the Beaux-Arts facades stretch across manicured lawns. The ocean wind carries the faint scent of salt over acres of marble terraces and Venetian windows. You step into Marble House, Alva Vanderbilt's Versailles-inspired creation. Every surface seems carved from stone, the walls, the columns, even the fireplace mantels. The dining room, famously costing more than $11 million in today's money, glows like the inside of a gilded jewelry box. Servants move silently across floors polished to mirror the chandeliers above. Chandeliers that burn with a fierce, trembling light, as if aware they are part of a spectacle too extravagant to last. You feel something shift inside you. These rooms are magnificent, but they are not warm. They feel like declarations of war cast in stone. Alva Vanderbilt built this house not simply to host parties, but to force the Astor's hand, to demand her seat in society's upper ranks. Every inch of this house is a blade hidden beneath velvet. You walk into the Chinese tea house outside Marble House, a jewel box of lacquered wood and carved dragons overlooking the restless sea. It feels dreamy, unreal, almost too delicate for the Atlantic winds that tug at its corners. Even here, in this peaceful pavilion, the war between families lingers in the air like a distant drum. Back in Manhattan, Fifth Avenue continues its transformation into a corridor of opulence. Jay Gould, the feared railway magnate, adds his own fortress to the boulevard. A mansion darker, more brooding, more secretive. You step inside and the tone shifts. His rooms feel like dens of strategy. Velvet drapes block out sunlight. Heavy oak furniture sits like immovable judgment. The chandeliers here do not sparkle, they burn with intention. Gould does not want society's approval. He wants control. And yet, despite all this grandeur, the city hums with gossip. The Vanderbilts are too new. Gould is too ruthless. Even the Astors, guardians of social order, feel the weight of change pressing on their windows. You sense that behind every beaded curtain, every gilded door, every ballroom wall lined with mirrors, something fragile is trembling. The rivalry culminates in the one place where reputation solidifies, the ballroom. You step into the opulent hall of Mrs. Astor's mansion, the temple of taste, they call it. Tonight, it gleams brighter than any cathedral. Mirrors cover the walls, bending light into rivers of gold. Crystal chandeliers sway gently from the ceiling, their flames flickering as dancers glide across the floor. You feel the music vibrate through the parquet. You hear the rustle of silk skirts touched by Parisian hands. The scent of lilacs and brandy fills the air. But beneath the glamour, a tension coils like smoke. Mrs. Caroline Astor herself stands near the center, wrapped in layers of black lace and authority. Her gaze sweeps across the room with the precision of a queen assessing her court. She sees everything. Every bow too deep, every smile too eager, every guest who shouldn't be here. And then it happens. Alva Vanderbilt enters. Not timidly, not quietly, but with the confidence of someone who has built her own Versailles and knows she deserves to be seen. The room shifts. Conversations falter. Even the orchestra seems to pause between notes. Mrs. Astor's eyes narrow, not in anger, but in calculation. The mirrored ceilings above catch the light, scattering it into prisms that dance across Mrs. Astor's face. But something about the glow feels wrong tonight. Too bright, too sharp, too revealing. As if the chandeliers themselves sense a fracture forming in the social order. You watch as Mrs. Astor lifts her fan slowly, almost thoughtfully. And for the first time in years, she hesitates, because she understands, perhaps before anyone else, that this room, this glittering battlefield, can no longer hold the weight of all these rising fortunes. The music resumes, the dancers continue, but the air has changed, and in that instant, beneath mirrored ceilings trembling with light, you feel it. Something is about to shatter. Even the brightest rooms grow cracks when too many fortunes fight for the same reflection. You step into the 1890s, into an America humming with a confidence that borders on delirium. The railroads have stitched the nation together. Steel is reshaping the skeleton of every city, and oil has become the dark bloodstream of a modern world. But beneath all this progress lies something far more staggering. The men who now stand above it. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan. You sense them before you ever see them. Presences so immense they distort the rooms they stand in. You begin in Cleveland, where John D. Rockefeller's empire took root. The Standard Oil Company rises from the industrial haze like a monolith. Its offices are orderly, austere, almost ascetic, a reflection of Rockefeller's personality. You walk past rows of clerks bent over ledgers, their pens scratching like insects across paper. Every sheet accounts for some fraction of the nation's wealth, every column tightening his grip on an industry he controls with an efficiency bordering on obsession. Rockefeller believed in order not just in finances but in destiny. You see it in the precision of his handwriting, the way he moves through hallways without wasted motion, the way he studies every contract as if the ink itself holds divine instruction. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. His power whispers through discounts, rebates, and a network of deals so intricate that no competitor survives long enough to understand how they were defeated. Light flickers across the office walls as typewriters crackle, the heartbeat of the age. Clerks type letters that will reshape entire markets, dismantle independent oil refiners, and send fortunes crashing overnight. You smell the faint sweetness of crude oil on boots, mingling with the bitter smoke of burning coal. Rockefeller watches it all with calm detachment, as if witnessing the natural order of things unfolding. You drift now to Pittsburgh, a city that does not merely grow, it erupts. Andrew Carnegie's steel mills roar like iron volcanoes. Sparks rain from furnaces, lighting the night sky in violent bursts of orange. Every clang of metal feels like a drumbeat marching toward the future. You stand above the Monongahela River and watch glowing steel rails slide like molten rivers across the factory floor. The heat is suffocating. Workers move with desperate precision, their faces streaked with sweat and soot. They have no delusions about the danger. Every shift risks life and limb. But outside the mill, Carnegie's philosophy floats gently in the air, the gospel of wealth. He believes those who accumulate vast riches are morally obligated to give them away for the betterment of mankind. And yet, you sense the contradiction. For behind his philanthropic ideals lies a ruthless empire built on cutting costs, breaking unions, and trusting managers like Henry Clay Frick, men willing to do what Carnegie pretends he cannot see. In the distance, you hear murmurs of unrest. The Homestead strike is coming, like a storm no one can outrun. But power in the 1890s does not end with steel or oil. It takes its purest form in New York, inside the dark red walls of an office on Wall Street, the domain of J.P. Morgan. You step inside and the air changes. The room smells of tobacco and polished mahogany. Heavy drapes block out the city noise. The light comes from green-shaded lamps that cast everything in a soft, judicial glow. Morgan sits behind a massive desk, his eyes sharp, his nose unmistakably dominant, his hands resting calmly atop folders containing the financial fate of entire industries. He does not shout. He does not hustle. He decides. Here, in this room, companies are not merely evaluated, they are engineered. Morgan buys failing railroads, reorganizes their debts, installs his own executives, and forces them into stability. He consolidates steel plants, utility companies, and banks. His reach becomes so vast that when the U.S. Treasury nearly collapses in the Panic of 1893, it is Morgan, not Congress, not the president, who saves the nation with a private loan of gold. You watch him sign the agreement. The ink dries with terrifying finality. It becomes clear, America is no longer governed solely by elected officials. It is governed quietly by capital, and the public begins to feel it. Outside Morgan's office, the streets rumble with a restless energy. Newspaper boys shout headlines. The trusts are growing. Rockefeller's monopoly chokes competition. Carnegie profits, workers bleed. Journalists sharpen their words like blades. Ida Tarbell begins her meticulous investigation into Standard Oil, driven by a personal grief. Her father's small refinery had been crushed by Rockefeller's aggressive tactics. Her articles will one day dismantle the world's strongest monopoly. You see her hunched over her desk late at night, surrounded by letters, testimonies, and the slow-growing realization that one man has bent the nation to his will. You sense the tension tightening across the country. Wealth has grown too fast, too high, too untouchable. The middle class feels invisible. The working class feels betrayed. The farmers feel suffocated by railroad rates. Even small business owners fear being devoured by corporations expanding like mechanical beasts. And yet, inside the mansions of the elite, the mood is entirely different. You walk into Morgan's Madison Avenue Library, a cathedral of leather-bound volumes and Renaissance art. You see Rockefeller's mansion on Euclid Avenue, decorated with understated elegance masking incomprehensible wealth. Carnegie's home in Manhattan hums with cultured evenings full of music, books, and European guests. These men live behind thick walls of privilege, shielded from the struggles simmering outside. But power, like wealth, has a shadow. You drift through the corridors of newspapers, the New York World, the Times, the Tribune, where printing presses thunder with accusations. Editorial cartoons portray the magnates as octopuses strangling the nation, their tentacles wrapped around Congress, railroads, factories, even the White House. The public begins to whisper, then to question, then to demand answers. Who owns America? Who controls its future? Who profits when ordinary men suffer? You return to Morgan's office one last time. Outside his windows, the city roars with unstoppable force. Inside, he sits in silence, reviewing financial statements under lamplight. His power feels immovable, yet the walls tremble faintly with the distant cries of a nation awakening. Something is shifting, something is fraying, something is about to rise against them. And as Morgan signs another contract, cigar smoke curling upward like a dark omen, you feel the inevitable turning point approaching. Slowly, inevitably, like the rumble of Congress warming its voice, like the first legal pens being sharpened, like the breath before a downfall. In the decade before the word billionaire existed, America already sensed the danger of men who could buy the future. You walk away from the marble corridors, the chandeliers, the mirrored ballrooms of Fifth Avenue, and the world changes so abruptly it steals your breath. The gold dissolves into soot. The carriages fade into rattling streetcars. The perfumes of society luncheons are replaced by the hard sting of coal smoke. This is still the Gilded Age. But here, in the East Side tenements of New York, in the boarding houses of Chicago, and the mill neighborhoods of Pittsburgh, the word gilded feels like a cruel joke. Only the surface shines. Everything underneath bleeds. You enter New York's Lower East Side first, the continent's most crowded square mile. The buildings rise like exhausted giants, leaning into each other with sagging brick and iron fire escapes that seem too thin to save anyone. You push open a tenement door and a wave of heat swallows you. There is no ventilation, no air, only bodies, families stacked in narrow rooms with ceilings stained from decades of kerosene lamps. A single window looks out onto an alley so narrow sunlight visits only for a minute each day, like a distant relative making an obligatory call. Coal ash drifts through the cracks, covering children's bedsheets, settling on the meager table where a mother folds laundry by candlelight. You hear coughing in the next room, the sharp, dry rasp of a lung that never learned to breathe clean air. The hallway smells of damp wood, cabbage boiling, and the sourness of too many people living too tightly together. The walls sweat, floors creak. You feel the tension of survival in every whispered conversation. Here, hope is not an emotion. It is a currency, spent carefully because too much can break the heart. Immigrant families arrive with dreams carried in burlap sacks. Italians escaping poverty, Jews fleeing pogroms, Germans chasing opportunity, Irish families trying to outpace hunger. They came believing America had room for everyone. Instead, they found that the country gave its brightest rooms to the few and packed the rest of its dreamers into these wooden boxes. You move now to Chicago, the industrial furnace of the Midwest. Stockyards stretch to the horizon, a labyrinth of corrals, slaughterhouses, and rail lines. The air is thick with the smell of blood, iron, and sweat. Workers trudge through muddy streets wearing boots that never properly dry. Their hands are cracked from cold winters, their voices hoarse from shouting over machinery. In the boarding houses nearby, men sleep in shifts. One lies down while another rises, each bed still warm from the previous body. Here, time doesn't move in days or nights, only in hours worked, hours slept, and hours endured. Those who labor in the stockyards work 12, sometimes 16 hours a day. Their pay barely covers food. Their lives dissolve into routine. Rise, toil, collapse, repeat. You hear a factory whistle scream in the distance, a shrill, metallic wail cutting through Chicago's dense fog. It is the sound of a shift ending, but also a reminder. These whistles govern their lives with mechanical precision. The people answer to metal, not to dreams. You drift toward Pittsburgh next, a city forged in fire. The steel mills glow like volcanic mouths. Flames belch upward, staining the night sky orange. The air is thick with metallic dust that settles on laundry, on windowsills, on children's faces. Men emerge from mill gates every dawn and dusk, their silhouettes outlined in soot, their shoulders stooped from carrying a nation on their backs. You step into a wooden shack near the Monongahela River, where one family shares a single room. A child sleeps on the floor wrapped in a thinner-than-winter blanket. The father's boots lie by the door, still smoking faintly from the heat of molten steel. The mother stirs a pot of thin soup, cabbage again, always cabbage, while humming a melody from her homeland, a tune that sounds too soft for a city this hard. Everywhere you walk, you hear the same story whispered in different accents. We came for a better life. We came to escape hunger. We came with hope. And yet, when they look at the Fifth Avenue mansions rising in the newspapers, marble halls, gold ceilings, chandeliers worth more than a lifetime's wage, you see something deepen in their eyes, not envy, but confusion. How can the same country build two worlds so violently different and still call itself one nation? You sense the strain tightening across these neighborhoods, the burden of rent, the relentless schedules, the dangerous work, and the knowledge that no matter how hard they push, the distance between them and the gilded palaces only widens. You hear children's laughter echoing in cramped courtyards, thin, fleeting, quickly drowned out by the roar of industry. You see women kneeling over communal water pumps, scrubbing clothes until their fingers numb. You watch men come home with cuts that won't heal, crushed fingers bandaged in dirty cloth, eyes that have forgotten color. Yet somehow they endure. And then, one afternoon, something shifts. You are standing near a factory in Chicago when a young man, maybe 20, maybe younger, drops his tool belt on the ground. He wipes sweat from his forehead and looks at the foreman with a stare too tired to remain obedient. He has worked 12 hours. The foreman demands 14. The boy's jaw tightens. Around him, dozens of workers watch. Their backs ache. Their wages shrink as the fortunes of their employers balloon. Their children cough through the night. Their rent rises every year. The boy reaches down, slowly, deliberately, and picks up a stone from the ground. He weighs it in his hand. You feel the air thicken. The crowd holds its breath. History cranes its neck. Then the stone flies. It smashes through a factory window with a crack that echoes across the yard and into the alleyways, bouncing off the brick walls like a warning shot. The glass shatters outward, glittering like ice. The foreman steps back. The workers step forward. It happens in Chicago. It happens in Pittsburgh. It happens in New York. It happens everywhere the Gilded Age forgot to look. The stone is not just a stone. It is a reply, a refusal, a beginning. You listen as the shouts rise, as more stones follow, as the first cries of revolt claw their way into the industrial sky. Smokestacks continue to belch black clouds, but now another smoke begins to rise. The smoke of unrest, of fury pushed too far, of labor waking up from a long and bitter sleep. For the first time in decades, the city seems to exhale, not with relief, but with anticipation. Something old has cracked. Something new is trying to emerge. And as the dust from that broken window settles on the cobblestones, you feel history itself lean forward, waiting to see what the workers will do next. When gold grows too bright, it blinds the eyes that built it, and the darkness that follows is never silent. You enter an America where anger has begun to breathe. The air feels heavier now, thick with coal dust and resentment. The wealth that built palaces on Fifth Avenue has carved deep scars across the nation's working class, and beneath those scars, something volatile simmers. You feel it in the streets, in the factories, in the railroad yards. The Gilded Age has dazzled long enough. Now its shadows begin to darken. You find yourself in 1877, a year when the country, strained by economic depression, trembles under the weight of its own contradictions. The railroads have become the veins of the nation, carrying not just goods but power. Railroad barons slash wages for workers already living on the brink. You hear the whispers first, carried by the wind through Baltimore, Martinsburg, Pittsburgh. How much more can they take? How long can they endure? Then, like a match dropped in dry grass, everything ignites. You stand in a railroad yard in Martinsburg, West Virginia, where the Great Railroad Strike begins. Rows of locomotives sit idle, hissing steam into the summer heat. Workers gather, exhausted men with calloused hands and eyes too worn to fear anymore. One man, shaking from rage and hunger, steps forward. His voice trembles but carries the weight of thousands. No train moves until wages return. It is not rehearsed, not organized, not even fully believed, but it is enough. The strike spreads like fire through telegraph lines. Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Chicago, St. Louis, New York, everywhere the rails run, the rebellion follows. Rail cars are uncoupled. Tracks are blocked. The heartbeat of the nation falters. You hear a rumble, not of trains, but of boots. Militia troops march into the yards, rifles glinting in the sun. But workers do not scatter. They form a human barricade across the tracks. Their silence is louder than any cry. Then the first shot cracks the air. It is impossible to say who fired, but when it echoes through the iron canyons of the city, history changes direction. You see flames rise that night, flames that dance against brick walls, flames reflected in broken windows, flames that devour rail cars as if they were paper. Pittsburgh becomes a furnace. Workers and soldiers clash in chaos, smoke choking the sky. You hear the crack of burning timber, the pop of shattering glass, the metal screeches of locomotives twisting under heat. Rail cars collapse like ribs under marching boots. Steel tracks warp. The city glows orange, as if the sun has been dragged down to street level to bear witness. The government responds not with compassion, but with escalation. The president orders federal troops into the streets. Bayonets flash beneath the street lamps. Workers fall. Families scream. The message is unmistakable. Industry will be protected. Labor will not. You leave Pittsburgh behind and travel forward nearly 2 decades. To another summer, another spark, another reckoning. It is 1894, and America is once again drowning in economic despair. The Pullman Palace Car Company outside Chicago has reduced wages without lowering rents in its company town. Workers live in beautiful houses they cannot afford, under rules they did not choose, in a system designed to bleed them dry. George Pullman, comfortable in his mansion, refuses to negotiate. The resentment turns into a pulse you can feel through the ground. You walk through the rows of neat houses, manicured lawns, white fences, cheerful facades masking quiet suffering. Men sit on porches staring at their boots, knowing they cannot feed their families. Women gather in kitchens, stretching meals into miracles. Children whisper, afraid to ask for anything more. Then the union arrives, Eugene V., Debs and the American Railway Union. They give the workers what Pullman never did: a voice. The strike begins peacefully, almost prayerfully. Then the railroads retaliate. Then the government steps in. Then everything snaps. You stand on the bridge outside the Pullman shops when the riot erupts. Workers overturn rail cars, shouting not in fury alone, but in desperation. U.S. Marshals fire into the crowd. Smoke blooms across the tracks. Telegraph lines sizzle as stones hit them, sparks spiraling like fireflies into the dusk. Chicago becomes a battlefield. Flames climb up freight cars, cracking with sharp metallic pops. Smoke billows over rooftops. Workers push forward. Soldiers push back. And the space between them becomes a graveyard for hope and certainty. You hear the sound of Union men singing labor hymns over the roar of burning timber. You hear mothers crying. You hear the shouts of police trying to regain control and failing. Debs, watching from a nearby street, realizes he cannot stop what has already turned into history's momentum. The strike is no longer about Pullman. It is about everything the Gilded Age has forced into silence. You return to the industrial north, Pittsburgh, Chicago, New York, and you feel the tremors running through every tenement, every mill, every factory. The laboring class has found its voice, and the elite feel the ground shaking beneath their marble floors. The magnates panic quietly. Rockefeller strengthens his alliances. Carnegie looks anxiously toward Homestead, remembering the blood on its gates. Vanderbilts tighten their grip on the rails. And J.P. Morgan, the man who stabilized Wall Street with a glance, begins to feel something unfamiliar: unease. You stand with him in his office on Wall Street. The lamps are already lit, though daylight still lingers beyond the drawn curtains. A telegraph operator rushes in, pale, shaken. He hands Morgan a strip of paper. The message is clipped, urgent, panicked. Strike escalating, lines down, unrest spreading. Morgan reads it twice. The room seems to still, as though even the dust motes are waiting for his reaction. Electricity hums faintly in the wires above the office, the sound of a nation speaking faster than it can be controlled. Then a telegraph line outside the building sparks violently. A crackle, a bright flash, a shower of sparks falling like gold flecks onto the street. For a moment, the entire block freezes. And in that flash of electric light, you see something flicker across Morgan's face. Recognition, not of danger, but of truth. The workers are no longer a class. They are a force, a storm, a reckoning. And if the nation's wealth refuses to bend, the people may burn the Gilded Age to save themselves. You leave Morgan's office and step into the street. The air feels charged, like the moment before lightning touches the ground. The riots have scorched more than rail yards and factories. They have scorched illusions. The nation stands on a threshold now, trembling between the world it built and the world demanding to be born. And somewhere, carried on the wind between the embers of revolt and the marble palaces they challenge, you hear a whisper from history itself. Every empire burns brightest just before it breaks. You step into an America that has begun to mutter in its sleep. The riots have cooled, the smoke has drifted, but something deeper remains unsettled. A quiet promise that the age of unchecked power is drawing to a close. The tycoons still believe they own the century. They still sit in their boardrooms beneath enormous chandeliers, still sign their contracts with sweeping confidence. But beneath their polished desks, the floorboards have begun to creak. Because now another force enters the room. Not a magnate, not a financier, not a railroad baron or steel king, but the government, slow, begrudging, and awakening like a giant it had forgotten it was. You find yourself in Washington, D.C. in 1890. The corridors of Congress still smell of pipe smoke and old varnish. Men in dark suits shuffle papers that will change the course of the nation. The Sherman Antitrust Act, thin as it appears on parchment, holds a weight the tycoons do not yet understand. Legislators argue in cramped committee rooms, their voices rasping with urgency. If left unchecked, they warn, these trusts will devour the republic whole. Ink dries slowly on the law that forbids monopolies. No one claps, no one celebrates. The act passes like a whispered warning. not a battle cry. For years, it will sit there, unused, ignored, gathering dust as the corporations it targets grow larger, heavier, more untouchable. You drift now to a courtroom in Cincinnati, then to another in Chicago. Long rows of benches, the scratch of fountain pens against paper, the echo of shoes on stone floors. Judges weigh cases with tired eyes. Lawyers stack documents like fortresses. Everywhere you go, you feel the tension. The law exists, but no one dares to use it. Not yet. The decade turns. The country grows restless. Then a man on horseback rides into the White House. Theodore Roosevelt, the storm in human form. Part cowboy, part philosopher, part righteous hurricane. You see him first not in a courtroom, but in motion. Charging up San Juan Hill, teeth clenched, eyes fierce. That energy never leaves him. When he becomes president, he brings the battlefield with him. Roosevelt walks the halls of the White House like a man searching for injustice to confront. And he finds it everywhere. In the railroads, in the oil pipelines, in the steel plants, in the whispering boardrooms of Manhattan. He does not merely wake up the government. He kicks down its door. You step into the Department of Justice around 1902. The room buzzes with urgency. Stacks of papers, maps of railroad networks, ledgers revealing freight rebates, evidence of collusion. Roosevelt's instructions are clear. Break the Northern Securities Company, a trust so enormous it has swallowed entire railroads across the Northwest. A corporation so powerful it bends freight rates, crushes competitors, and intimidates courts. Its architects, J.P. Morgan, James J. Hill, and the railroad titans who believed they could weld multiple empires into one. The lawsuit is filed, and suddenly the strongest men in America feel a tremor beneath their feet. You follow J.P. Morgan into his library, the soft glow of lamps reflecting off dark wood, the faint scent of leather and tobacco lingering like a memory. Morgan unfolds the government's complaint with hands that once negotiated peace between nations. His eyebrow lifts, his jaw tightens. Then he does something rare. He asks for a meeting. Roosevelt agrees. You witness their encounter in the White House, the banker in his tailored suit, the president leaning forward with a glint in his eye. If we have done anything wrong, Morgan says quietly, send your man to my man and they should fix it. Roosevelt doesn't blink. That can't be done, he replies. And with those words, the balance of the Gilded Age shifts. You return to the courtroom where Northern Securities faces dissolution. The room is packed. Reporters, lawyers, judges, stenographers whose fingers ache as they try to capture every word. The arguments rattle the chamber. The trust is too large to be allowed, too powerful to be ignored, too dangerous to leave standing. The judges deliberate for months. The country waits. Then the decision arrives. Northern Securities must be broken apart. The ink on the ruling spreads like a crack through the foundation of the Gilded Age. It is the first domino. More follow. Oil, tobacco, railroads, meatpacking, sugar. Corporations that once felt immortal suddenly face subpoenas, audits, investigations. You watch as government clerks carry stacks of evidence so high they nearly topple. Courtrooms hum with papers and anger. Fountain pens squeal across indictments. And for the first time in decades, the magnates tremble. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, the most powerful monopoly in the world, becomes the largest target. Investigators uncover rebates, secret deals, predatory pricing, industrial espionage. Ida Tarbell's writing exposes the company's underbelly to the public gaze. The legal walls close in. You stand in the courtroom the day the ruling is announced. Standard Oil must be dismantled into 34 separate companies. The shockwave ripples across the nation. Something sacred to the Gilded Age has been broken. Even Carnegie, in his castle of libraries and philanthropic dreams, feels the shift. Even the Vanderbilts, with their empires of steel rails, sense the days of unchecked expansion closing. Even Gould's legacy begins to crack beneath the judgment of public opinion. You walk through the corridors of power as the decade ends. Files are sealed. Corporations are carved apart. Wealth adapts, changes shape, flows into new channels, but it no longer towers above the law. And then, one afternoon, you enter a courtroom where another trust faces judgment. The judge lifts his gavel. The room holds its breath. The air thickens with anticipation, with history, with consequence. The strike of the gavel does not come quickly. It hangs there, suspended, as if the entire age waits for its verdict. Then it falls, slowly, deliberately, like a coffin lid closing. The sound echoes through the chamber, through Wall Street, through every boardroom that once believed itself untouchable. The government has woken up, and the age of giants trembles. Even the strongest empires bow when the law finally remembers its strength. You return now to the palaces the Gilded Age once summoned, but something is different. The light has changed. The air has settled. What once glittered now sighs beneath the weight of silence. You step into the early 1900s, into an America reshaping itself with every passing season, and you watch as the world the magnates built begins to tremble from the inside out. The marble mansions of Fifth Avenue still stand, but the energy that once pulsed within them has thinned. These homes were constructed for an era of limitless servants, cheap coal, and endless admiration. But the new century is colder, stricter, less enchanted by wealth's theatrics. You walk into a ballroom on Upper Fifth Avenue, a room once illuminated by 1,000 candles, once alive with waltzes and champagne laughter. Now, in the morning light, the place feels drafty, the ceiling so high it chills itself. A layer of dust rests on the parquet floor, thin as regret. A grand piano sits with its lid closed, like a mouth that has forgotten how to sing. The housekeeper, one of the last remaining, moves slowly through the hall, her footsteps echoing far too loudly in a room that once devoured sound with velvet and bodies in movement. She dusts a banister no one touches anymore. She checks a chandelier that hasn't been lit in months. You notice her pause, hand on crystal, as if quietly asking how much longer this place will pretend to live. Servant wages have risen, coal costs have doubled, taxes multiply like weeds, and society has shifted its attention. The grand homes of Fifth Avenue are no longer temples of envy. They are relics, burdens, portraits of a time slipping away faster than anyone expected. You drift now to Newport, the summer kingdom of America's aristocracy. The breakers crash against the rocky shoreline with a kind of indifference. The mansions here, once lively with European chefs, French decorators, and armies of servants, sit shuttered for most of the year. Many families visit only for a week or two, unlocking vast homes for mere days of occupancy. At the breakers, the Vanderbilt Palace built like an Italian Renaissance fantasy, you walk through vast hallways lined with gilded doors. They no longer open with purpose, only maintenance. The great dining hall, with its towering glass windows and two-story Corinthian columns, feels like a cathedral abandoned by its congregation. The staff, once dozen strong, has dwindled. The gardeners can't keep the roses from overtaking the pathways. Marble fountains crack in winter freezes. Gilded Age decadence does not age well. It decays loudly. And yet, in all this quiet deterioration, something poignant lingers. The heirs. They arrive stumbling into fortunes so large they cannot comprehend them, but also into responsibilities so heavy they can barely lift the ledger books. Inheritance becomes less a gift and more a weight around the ankles. You meet one such heir not by name but by presence. He wanders through his father's ballroom, touching the cold banister as though it were a stranger. His fingers trail along a marble fireplace carved by artisans flown in from Florence. His eyes drift upward to frescoed ceilings painted with scenes from mythology he never learned. He loves none of it. He fears all of it, because he knows what the older generation refuses to admit. These mansions are not homes. They are financial sinkholes. Every day costs money, staggering money to heat, to clean, to maintain. And he is not a tycoon. He is simply a young man with a fortune too brittle to support a world already fading. Many heirs begin to sell off their mother's jewels. Then the horses, then the portraits, then the land. But sometimes even that isn't enough. You travel next to the outskirts of Philadelphia, to one of the greatest monuments of Gilded Age ambition, Linwood Hall, the 110-room neoclassical masterpiece built by Peter Widener, a titan of Philadelphia streetcar and meatpacking empires. You approach its long facade, limestone glowing pale against the winter sun. The columns rise like ancient sentinels. The windows stare outward like hundreds of unblinking eyes. Inside, you feel the weight of a tragedy already written. Peter Widener built this home with the confidence of a man who believed his legacy impossible to extinguish. He filled it with art Rembrandt, Raphael, El Greco, purchased with the profits of a nation still finding itself. The grand entrance hall stretches before you like a European palace. The library smells faintly of oak and memories. Everything here is oversized. Ceilings, mirrors, fireplaces, expectations. But the Widener family line suffers blows no architect could calculate. George Widener and his son Harry die aboard the Titanic in 1912. Peter Widener follows in grief 3 years later. The heir left behind, Joseph Widener, inherits not just a fortune but a mausoleum of sorrow. He tries for a while to keep the estate alive. He hosts events. He opens galleries. He maintains the gardens. But time, taxes, and loneliness erode even the strongest foundation. By the 1920s, the estate is too large, too cold, too heavy. Joseph begins selling the priceless paintings, one by one, until the gallery wings feel like empty ribs. Servant quarters go dark. A gardener trims the hedges alone, pruning a kingdom built for dozens. The final moment arrives quietly. You walk down a corridor where the scent of dust clings to the wallpaper. For light bulbs dangle from a ceiling fixture, but only one still works. Flickering, dim, like a heartbeat losing its rhythm. This glow barely reaches the walls. The shadows swallow most of the hallway. Joseph Widener steps into the room. Older now, shoulders slumped, suit loose on his frame. He pauses beneath the trembling light. His eyes drift across the emptiness. The echo of his shoes sounds too loud in the hollow space. He reaches for the switch. The bulb flickers again, as if pleading for one more chance. One more evening. One more era. Then the light dies. He stands in darkness for a moment that feels like the end of an epic. Then he turns, and he walks away. Behind him, Linwood Hall, a masterpiece, a mausoleum, a memory, remains silent. You step outside with him. The winter wind whips across the lawns, tugging at the abandoned gardens where roses have strangled their own trellises. The house rises in the distance, vast and unlit, a monument too expensive to love and too historic to destroy. Across America, similar stories unfold. Newport mansions shutter their wings. Fifth Avenue homes become unmanageable burdens. Servants depart for easier jobs. Electricity bills climb. Property taxes crush. Even the wealthiest families begin to understand the truth. They built castles for a world that does not exist anymore. These homes were meant to touch heaven. Now they can barely keep the roof from leaking. The Gilded Age dream is collapsing quietly. Not in fire, not in scandal, but in the slow suffocation of a lifestyle the modern world refuses to support. And as the last Widener walks away from Linwood Hall, the house behind him settles into its new identity. Not a palace, but a ghost. Some mansions die not in ruins, but in silence. You step into New York City at the end of the 1920s, a decade swollen with champagne and denial, and you feel immediately that something is wrong. The light on Wall Street is too bright, too sharp, like the glare cast by a chandelier seconds before it shatters. The sidewalks shimmer with optimism, yet beneath the surface, the city trembles the way a violin's string shivers when plucked too hard. Everyone insists the good times will last forever, but even the sky feels unconvinced. You enter the New York Stock Exchange on a late October morning. The room is a cathedral of motion. Thousands of men shouting, jostling, waving slips of paper like desperate prayers. The smell of sweat, ink, and raw anxiety hangs in the air. Ticker machines rattle ceaselessly, spitting out thin ribbons of numbers. Their chatter sounds almost frantic, as if the machines themselves can sense the storm rolling inward. For years, the market has climbed without breathing. Brokers have encouraged clients to buy on margin, to invest with money they do not have. Taxi drivers boast about their stock picks. Housewives trade shares from kitchen tables. Young clerks borrow from banks to gamble on the dreams of strangers. The entire nation balances itself on a tightrope of credit and confidence, pretending not to notice how far below the ground waits. You watch as the first cracks appear. A whisper spreads across the floor. A drop in steel stocks, a sudden sell-off in utilities, a rumor of trouble in railroads. At first, the traders shrug. The market has dipped before, but today no one rushes in to buy the falling shares. This time, the dip becomes a slide, and the slide becomes something far worse. Then a bell rings, not loudly, but sharply, the kind of sound that slices through illusion. The floor erupts. You hear the panic before you see it. Shouts turn into screams. Orderly rows dissolve into chaos. Brokers shove past one another, waving sell orders that multiply faster than they can be processed. The ticker machines cannot keep pace. Their printouts lag minutes behind reality, their numbers useless. Papers flutter to the ground like dead white petals. A man collapses against a column. Another stares at his hands as if they've forgotten how to hold anything. You watch a veteran broker, a man who once believed he could outsmart gravity, burst into tears. No metaphor, no grand tragedy, just a quiet, helpless sob in the corner of a room built on confidence. You realize then how fragile this empire has always been. Outside, the crowd grows thicker. People press against windows, peering into the maelstrom as if watching their futures burn. Reporters sprint between buildings. Rumors multiply. Banks failing, fortunes evaporating, businesses collapsing. Every whisper adds weight to the panic until the air feels too heavy to breathe. You drift through the financial district like a shadow moving through a nightmare. Each building holds its own brand of shock. In one office, a secretary quietly burns documents to hide evidence of reckless loans. In another, an executive stares at the phone, praying for a call from a partner who won't come. You hear a man mutter the same phrase over and over. It wasn't supposed to end, but it is ending, and it is ending in freefall. You walk north toward the residences of the wealthy. Park Avenue towers, townhouses trimmed in limestone, penthouses with crisp white curtains. The panic has reached these rooms too. Servants whisper behind doors as their employers raise their voices. Heirs who have never held a real job pace across polished floors, thinking of the money they invested yesterday and lost today. For the first time, the upper class feels a fear they cannot decorate or drown in champagne. It arrives cold, metallic, and deserved, a reminder that even the wealthiest hands cannot catch a falling nation. You pass through one mansion where the owner, once proud, now pale, throws open his safe to find it nearly empty. He had leveraged everything. Stocks he thought were solid have evaporated like steam. Portraits of ancestors hang above him, watching silently, their gilded frames mocking his borrowed fortune. Further uptown, you find a widow clutching a newspaper in disbelief. Her husband died years ago, leaving her with investments she thought would last a lifetime. Now the page is a battlefield of collapsing companies and plunging prices. The silence in the room feels like a funeral, even though no one has died. But the worst scenes are found in the homes of the middle class. Clerks, teachers, shopkeepers who believe the market was their ticket to security. You see a man staring at a letter from the bank informing him that his life savings have vanished. His children ask him why he is crying. He cannot answer. The crash is not just financial. It is human. It is emotional. It is a reckoning written in ink and fear. By the time you return to Wall Street, the chaos has spread. Police form barricades. Investors plead for answers. A few men stare up at tall buildings with hollow eyes. The newspapers will twist their tragedies into symbols of the nation's fall. But not everyone loses everything. J.P. Morgan's men attempt to intervene, gathering bankers to stabilize the market. They try to buy shares to restore confidence. But the decades have shifted. The monopoly age is ending. The titans are aging. Their money no longer commands obedience. The people have stopped listening. The economy spirals downward. Banks fail. Factories close. Millions lose their jobs. Lines for bread wind around street corners. And all the while, the mansions of the Gilded Age, The Fifth Avenue palaces, the Newport estates, the grand country houses become mausoleums of a vanished confidence. Electricity is shut off in empty rooms. Ballrooms gather dust as thick as velvet. Great halls echo with the sound of nothing. The world that believed wealth could rise forever discovers what every empire eventually learns. No one escapes the cycle of rise and ruin. The American dream, swollen with greed, collapses under its own golden weight. One evening, you walk through a quiet Wall Street. The street lamps cast long shadows across the empty pavement. A single ticker tape drifts across the ground, pushed by the wind. It flutters like a dead flower petal before settling beside a gutter. The silence feels final. And then, somewhere, faintly, you hear the whisper that ends the age. Nothing built on unchecked greed can survive its own reflection. You walk into the mid-20th century, long after the chandeliers have dimmed and the orchestra has packed away its instruments. The smoke of the Depression has settled, 2 world wars have reshaped the planet, and America now marches toward a modern future with steel skyscrapers and suburban dreams. But behind this new world lies the skeleton of an older one, the remains of fortunes built on oil, steel, and railways, the fragments of palaces too extravagant to sustain themselves. You begin in the 1940s inside a museum gallery in Washington, D.C. The rooms are quiet, pleasantly lit, lined with works of art once guarded by wealthy dynasties. A guard stands motionless, hands clasped, beneath a Rembrandt once owned by Henry Clay Frick. Nearby, a Turner painting, sold long ago to fund a collapsing estate, now hangs with institutional dignity. The labels below the frames tell stories sanitized for public consumption. Gift of the Vanderbilt family, presented by the Widener Collection, from the Havmeyer estate. But you know what these plaques do not say. They do not mention the tax burdens, the empty ballrooms, the desperate sales of masterpieces once meant to stay in family hands forever. You move down the corridor. On the walls, dusty portraits stare back at you. Faces of men and women who once dictated the cultural pulse of the nation. Their eyes follow you, though their porcelain expressions give nothing away. You notice cracks in the varnish, faint and spiderwebbed, as if time is slowly reclaiming their pride. You step closer. The gaze is haunting, as if they once lived inside palaces and now live inside memories. You leave the museum and travel north, toward New York. Fifth Avenue has shed its aristocratic skin. The mansions are gone, demolished, gutted, repurposed. Where marble halls once resonated with laughter and music, luxury boutiques now shine with digital lights. The old addresses remain: 640 Fifth Avenue, the Vanderbilt Mansion, but nothing of the past survives above ground. Only photographs remain, locked in archives, showing facades carved with ambition and excess. You walk down the avenue slowly, letting the modern glass towers reflect the absence of what has vanished. These vast palaces, once symbols of triumph, proved too heavy for the new century. Their upkeep was impossible, their relevance outdated, their futures unguaranteed. You continue to Newport, a place where ghosts feel comfortable. At Marble House, the wind whistles through the shutters, echoing faintly through the corridors like a memory rehearsing itself. Tour guides lead small groups across marble floors once polished daily by servants. Visitors speak in hushed tones, as though afraid to wake the shadows lingering beneath the gilded ceilings. The velvet upholstery, faded by decades of salt air, droops in quiet exhaustion. Even the chandeliers, magnificent but weary, seem dimmer than they once were. You linger in the ballroom, imagining Alva Vanderbilt commanding the room with regal certainty. Now, the space feels too large for its own silence. Dust motes drift through beams of sunlight that cut across the empty floor. The gold leaf on the walls is still bright, but the spirit is gone, like a costume worn long after the performance has ended. A child tugs at their mother's sleeve and asks, "Did people really live like this?" The mother hesitates. History hesitates. The room answers for her with its emptiness. You travel next to Biltmore, the largest private home ever built in America. It still stands proudly in Asheville, its stone facade framed by the Blue Ridge Mountains. But even this palace could not survive as a private residence. The cost was too staggering, too unreasonable for any heir to shoulder. Today, it is a museum, a tourist destination, a relic. Visitors walk through its halls with admiration and disbelief, as if exploring a lost kingdom. In the library, thousands of books line the walls in perfect rows. You run your hand gently over the spines. The room smells of aged paper and cedar, the scent of knowledge preserved beyond its owner's reach. George Vanderbilt imagined this estate would be a legacy of refinement and intellectual pursuit. Instead, it became a monument to the impossibility of holding onto grandeur in a century intent on outgrowing it. And then you return to Philadelphia, to Linwood Hall, the mansion too vast for time to digest. This place is not polished, not preserved, not celebrated. It is haunting. As you approach, the facade rises like a solemn titan, its windows dark, its gardens wild. Vines creep across limestone walls that once glowed beneath lantern light. The gravel path crunches under your feet, echoing into an emptiness so deep it feels almost sacred. You push open a heavy door, its hinges groaning in protest. The hall yawns into view, columns rising into shadows, chandeliers hanging like crystal skeletons, rugs rolled up or rotting where they lie. Velvet drapes sag, chewed at the edges by decades of neglect. The scent of dust and cold stone clings to everything. In one of the smaller sitting rooms, you find a single bulb dangling from the ceiling. Outdated, lonely, its surface yellowed with age. When it flickers on, the light barely reaches the corners of the room. The wallpaper peels, the plaster cracks, the emptiness breathes. This bulb, this faint, trembling survivor, casts a weak glow down a corridor lined with portrait niches. But the paintings are gone. The faces have vanished. Only the frames remain. You follow the thin line of light deeper inside. The bulb flickers again. At the far end of the hallway stands the last widener, his silhouette visible only in memory now. He pauses, turns, and walks away from the estate that consumed his lineage. He does not look back, and the house, left behind, exhales in resignation. You remain standing in the silence he abandoned. In the decades that follow, America will transform again and again. The middle class expands. The suburbs grow. New wealth rises, digital and weightless, no longer anchored in limestone or marble. The old mansions die slowly, or they are reborn as museums, schools, hotels, shells of the lives they once hosted. History rewrites itself. Legacies become myths. Facts blur into stories, and stories blur into nostalgia. When people speak of the Gilded Age now, they speak of glamour, of opulence, of the illusion that wealth could build eternity. But few remember the cracks, the inequality, the ruin, the cost. You step into a final hallway in any mansion that remains. You breathe in the dust. You feel the weight of everything the Gilded Age tried to preserve. And there, in the dim light, one question lingers like a shadow stretching across a century. Was the Gilded Age destroyed, or simply outgrown?